Good afternoon, Peace Coalition folk. My name is Jeff Laurenti, Chairman of the Coalition for Peace Action, and welcome to our Members' Day gathering of 2026. This is always a special event, and never more so than on a day that is specially venerated by many of our fellow citizens. No, not for the flag waving, but for a landmark anniversary of the birth of a dear leader. In Korean, Chinai Hanneon Jidoja, Korean, or a Liebe Führer, if your tastes run to the Germanic roots of Northern Europe. The fellow citizens I'm thinking of are celebrating today's holiday on the south lawn of the White House with a spectacle called unlimited fighting. Unlimited fighting. That seems to be where we are these days. It befits a regime that fetishizes war, that celebrates lethality and deprecates legality, and that even seeks to revert in the bureaucratic title to war rather than defense as what our most richly funded federal department is all about. This is not, however, what the Coalition for Peace Action is all about. We do not view peace as a limp-wristed four-letter word of derision. We do not view law, international law as much as any, as merely a foil for willful strongmen. We do not view weapons of mass extermination as the cornerstone of stability and prosperity. As some of our leaders wax nostalgic for the world before 1914, indeed nostalgic for William McKinley's world of 1898, replete with tariffs and splendid little imperialist wars, we look forward. We look forward to reinstituting binding limits on the size of any nation's nuclear weapons cache, and then reducing those limits, and then reducing them again. We look forward to international judicial mechanisms actually trying and punishing perpetrators of aggression and genocide. We look forward to the Congress asserting the right the Constitution reserved to it on behalf of the people to take the country into war. And we look forward to all of you ostentatiously becoming voters for peace, about which I think Bob Moore may offer a word or two later in our program. Let me recognize among our guests here, Councilman David Cohen, fresh off, please stand. Fresh off a landslide second place finish in the primary for re-election to Princeton Council. Is there anyone here with us for his or her first time? Would you stand and give us your name? I'm sorry, Irquan Kouash in Princeton. Yes. Okay, welcome. And Zora Carroll from Philadelphia. Zora Carroll from Philadelphia. Remember, Philadelphia is Trenton's partner for the 250th on July 4th. Sir. From Tom's River. Whoa. Thank you for making the trip. Anyone else here with us for the first time? Yes, sir.
Rodney Richards
from Hamilton. Wonderful, Rodney Richards. Thank you. Okay, coalition members, you're entitled to know what the coalition has been doing with your dues dollars and maybe extra donations above and beyond. And I know just the guy to tell you. Please welcome our 45-year executive director, not 45-year-old, our 45-year executive director, the Reverend Robert Moore.
Thank you, Jeff, and I want to, I agree with everything he just said, by the way, in case you're wondering. I want to thank you for being here this afternoon, and I want to thank you even more for your participation in CFPA's peacemaking programs over this past year. So I want to spend just a few minutes looking back on some of the highlights of the last year, and I'd like you to refer to, in your program, this yellow sheet that has the highlights of our accomplishments over the last year. I'm not going to spend much time going over each of them one by one, but I want to just highlight a few things. First of all, you can see from there that we have been very active in responding to multiple crises. Rallies with over 14,000 attendees in this past year. Let me make sure you heard that number. 14,000 people came to our rallies and events over this past year.
Not one person, 14,000.
And then also the second and third to the last bullets are the most recent rallies, which are around the recent threats of war against Venezuela and, of course, the one with Iran, both of which got actualized, and I pray to God that this Iran war is nearing, at least, an end. We got to get there somehow. Most recently, we've been part of a war powers resolution. And that passed, but it didn't pass until the fourth try. Now, this is one of the hallmarks of real peacemaking, is you don't just try it once, you don't just try it twice. We are determined, we have staying power, and we keep fighting for what's right until we get it, and we succeeded on the fourth try in the House of Representatives. Thank you for each of you who helped with that, and now we're moving on to the Senate, and the Senate's already passed one law that is going to let the same bill be considered in the Senate. And so we're making progress there, but we aren't going to get there unless each of us does everything we possibly can. So when you get an email from us, pay attention to it. Because when you either send an email or make the phone call that we're asking you to do, so sometimes it's phone calls in the case of senators, because we each have 2 senators, right? When that happens, take it seriously, because it means we might finally get there to pass it in that second success. We've had successful and vigorous peace voter campaigns in last year's New Jersey gubernatorial race, and now this year in targeted races in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. I'm especially proud this year that we gave 13 candidate briefings in our peace voter campaign. That's the most we've ever given in any of our peace voter campaigns. 13. I don't see, is Professor Frank von Hippel here? I'm going to give him credit, even though he's not here yet. He really starts those off on such a powerful note. He's a world-class nuclear weapon expert, former assistant director of the White House Science Advisor's Office. So when we're briefing those candidates, to have him up as our first speaker, and he has a slideshow, a PowerPoint, that he presents, and it gives the highlights of the nuclear weapons danger in 12 minutes. In 12 minutes. And so it's just an incredible start to those. Let me tell you also, we ask for any comments from the candidate at the end of that. Every single one of them said they deeply appreciated it and found it to be very informing for them as candidates running for Congress. So I'm very proud of that success, and we need to keep going forward now because in the general election, now we're past the primaries, as you know, in the general election, there are at least 2 races here in New Jersey that could flip. And that's what we need to have happen. District 7 and District 2. By the way, both those districts, we had very friendly and favorable interaction with them in those candidate briefings. So we've got our foot in the door with them. I think we can have real influence as we go into the fall portion of our Peace Voter 2026 campaign. None of this, none of what I've talked to you about would be possible by any individuals doing it alone. It's all about a team effort. And that's a mantra I'd like you to ask you to say it with me. Peace is a team effort. Peace is a team effort. And thank you for being such an important and central part of the team. Now that brings me up to the end of my talk, actually, which is about continuing this effort and intensifying it. And to intensify it takes resources. There's no getting around it. And we need more staffing, we need more resources, and so we're working on some potential foundation grants, but we also need you and your individual support. We are so fortunate that many of you, almost all of you, have contributed at least a membership, which we're grateful for. But in addition to that, we need people that will go higher than that and do something like give us a certain amount every month. It's very easy. And you know, I started being a monthly pledger years ago at $25 a month. Well, you know, that adds up to $300 over the year. So this is the kind of support that we're really hoping to have from you. And to talk to you a little bit more about that, I'd like to next call on the Reverend Carol Haig to talk to you about ways you can support us. Thank you.
Can't operate without Ken. Good afternoon. We are all here because we are concerned that our country is at war and we continue to build and build more nuclear weapons. That is exactly what the Coalition for Peace Action was founded for some 45, maybe 46 years ago. We are horrified that this case how the case is now, and that the temptation, I know I feel, and maybe others do, is to hide under the covers and hope it will go away. But you're not hiding. You're here. We are all here, and we need to continue to be here. We believe in the importance of the work for the coalition continuing to go ahead. This coalition is one of the few continuing strong peace organizations in the country, and it needs to be ready to take on the challenge for the future. So this is a time of gratitude. We are grateful for the people who are able to give out of their abundance generously. We are grateful for the sponsors who stepped up to the plate for today. And we are especially grateful for those who don't necessarily have deep pockets, but are pledging regular gifts to the coalition. And so I would like to ask anyone and all those who are pledgers to stand and raise their hands so we can give them a round of applause in gratitude. So if you are a pledger, stand, 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 stand. As Bob said, it's definitely a team effort. Now, one of the things that is not on the highlights of accomplishment for the year is that the coalition stepped up to do a strategic plan. And this is a plan to make it strong and continued into the future. This was led by a woman named Cecily Wake, who runs the rather unusually titled organization called We Divine Water. She met with us, she did a tremendous amount of research and brought the findings back, and the coalition met in retreat to decide what to do with this. And so, without going into all the details, this strategic plan has goals for the governance structure. It has goals to change and modify and increase and improve our outreach. It has goals for funding and adding funding in a way that we've not been able to do. But I must add that one of the best things that the strategic plan did and the coalition steering committee carried out was to expand our staff in increasing Jen news hours. Please applaud Jen.
So we're going to shift now to the next stage before our keynote speaker, the last stage, which is a couple of honorees that we want to recognize today. And I'm going to be saying a few words about our first honoree. One of the keys to success in our organizing work, organizing for peace, is that if you try to do things alone, you're unlikely to be very successful. The key to having successful organizing is collaboration. To do it in partnership with other groups in your area. And we have learned that over and over. We've been extremely fortunate to have a collaborator who's very special to us, and that is Laura Zerflew of Indivisible Cranberry. Now, I mentioned the rallies that we've had that are in your highlights of accomplishments. Let me just say that in 4 of those 6 rallies on that page that had a total of 14,000 people attending, 4 of those 6 we did in partnership with Laura and her organization, Indivisible Cranberry. Her leadership and co-leadership was absolutely essential. And I mean, this is like a dream partnership to me. I could not imagine somebody who is more enthusiastic, more committed, more ready to do whatever needs to be done to get those rallies and that work to be successful. She has recruited some excellent speakers for our rallies, but in addition to that, she's also been the MC for several of them. So she is a very talented woman with diverse skills and really major leadership. She is a smart and powerful speaker and organizer, and CFPA could not have done the things that we've done except by being in partnership with people like Laura Zerflew and Indivisible Cranberry. So I want to call up Laura to come and receive this recognition. While Laura's coming up, let me just mention there's lots of other collaborators here. One of them that I think is very special to us also, I'm not going to call him up here this time, but eventually I think we're going to get to him, and that's Dozier Hammond of Princeton Community Democratic Organization. They have very strict rules on what they do about co-sponsoring things, but often, almost every time, as long as Dozier is informed about it, he finds a way to get the word out. And so we're very grateful for Dozier Hammond's work too. So we're gonna give a certificate to Laura. The Coalition for Peace Action is pleased to honor Laura Zerflew in recognition of outstanding peace leadership and major contributions to the pursuit of peace.
I would just like to say, I don't know if you can hear me, but I would just like to say that Bob is overselling me and underselling himself because you know, I did no activism until January of 2017. I don't know if you can connect the dots, but there was an election in November of 2016. And so I really didn't know anything. I had been to one rally in my entire life, one protest. And when I partnered with Bob, he kind of showed me the ropes. And without his leadership, we would not have been as successful as we have been. So thank you. Thank you, Bob.
In the spirit of collaboration, so I'm Irene Goldman, as it's mentioned in your program. I have not met my honoree before today, but I've heard about her, and I so appreciate the generosity of spirit in which she has created herself in our world of peacemaking. And I'm really so pleased to introduce you to Lisa Winkler, who's a leader of New Jersey Moms Demand Action, with whom we work closely on our issue of gun violence prevention. I'm going to give a little history here about why gun violence prevention has become so important. Well, it is important to everyone, but in 1993, based on the Coalition for Peace Actions, we are also called CFPA sometimes, the action of halting weapons trafficking priority, the CFPA was asked to partner with a relatively new group called Ceasefire New Jersey to defeat the NRA's effort to rescind New Jersey's assault weapons ban, which had been passed and signed into law a few years earlier. A collaborative effort was undertaken toward defeating the rescission. It had passed in the New Jersey Assembly, but CFPA joined with Ceasefire New Jersey to lobby our New Jersey state senators, culminating with a rally at the State House. And then, when the vote was taken in the Senate, not a single New Jersey senator voted to rescind the ban. The New Jersey senator for Princeton and Trenton at the time was asked why they voted to keep the ban. And they simply answered that they got 1,000 phone calls from constituents, and 90% said, keep the ban. So your activism every day, when we ask you to step up and do something, please do. It makes an enormous difference. And then in 2010, due to some internal organizational challenges, Ceasefire New Jersey as an organization chose to become a project of under the Coalition for Peace Action umbrella. So they are a project, now Ceasefire is New Jersey, Ceasefire New Jersey is the Coalition for Peace Action. And since then, our collaborative work with key groups across the state, including Mom Demand Action, has passed over 25 new gun safety laws. As a result, New Jersey has the third lowest per capita rate of gun violence in the nation. Key to that, As a result, so key to that was the leadership of Moms Demand Action. And Lisa Winkler, who is one of the Moms Demand Action leaders in New Jersey, has been a strong force in those successes. A good example was our major effort to pass legislation to ban easy access to cheap software on the internet that allowed ghost guns to be printed on a 3D printer. Such ghost guns have no serial number and can't be traced if used in a violent crime. So we also worked hard to ban inexpensive conversion devices that could easily turn a gun designed to only fire one bullet with each pull of the trigger into a fully automatic machine gun. And despite the strong efforts of all of us, of our Coalition for Peace Action, of Ceasefire New Jersey, Moms Demand Action, and other collaborators, we failed to get those bills passed by the mid-December deadline of 2025. But Lisa Winkler kept closely monitoring these bills. This is one person who kept closely monitoring these bills and learned that a vote was scheduled for December 22nd, 25. And she let our Ceasefire New Jersey and other collaborators know. And with the holidays so close, many could not make it to the State House, but Lisa Winkler and Moms Demand Action supporters showed up, and both bills were passed. Every small action we take, every thought that you have on how to make a difference counts. Do it. Don't think it doesn't count. It always counts. And so I'm very pleased to honor Lisa Winkler and find Lisa Winkler and Moms Demand Action for their tenacious action. Thank you. So this says, the Coalition for Peace Action is pleased to honor Lisa Winkler in recognition of outstanding peace leadership and major contributions to the pursuit of peace. Okay.
I do want to say something. Let me just say this. Thank you very much. I do appreciate it. I will tell you that I feel like I need to earn it. One of the things I will be doing in the morning is traveling to D.C. to lobby for gun sense bills. We're going to be meeting, Moms Demand Action and I will be meeting with our 2 senators and all of our U.S. representatives. So if Tom Kane Jr. shows up, I'm taking pictures.
That's a ghost.
So anyway, thank you very much. I am honored. And I just want to quote from MLK. You know, he said power was the ability to achieve purpose. And power isn't a trait, a quality, or a characteristic. It's actually influence created by relationships. So I want to thank all of you for inviting me here to create some more relationships so we can continue to create that teamwork for peace. So thank you very much.
At the National Conference of the Council on Foreign Relations this past weekend, the panel on the transatlantic relationship was particularly striking to me. The debate among the 4 talking heads, eminent experts, and the moderator was about the military preparedness dimension to the U.S.-European relationship. Strictly dollars and cents, how much is being invested, in quotation marks, invested in the military, in defense spending. Europeans were talking about how European governments have finally turned the corner thanks to the current U.S. administration's relentless pressure to make the Europeans spend more on their militaries, to pay their fair share, in the words of our current leaders in Washington. Only Charlie Kupchan, who had worked in the Clinton and then Obama administrations, described the damage to the relationship as being very substantively irreparable, and irreparable because it contradicted the very values that had been the unifying issues and principles that had bound us together. And nobody on the panel or from the audience raised issues of international law, the United Nations, or whatever. Not that I didn't try, but I couldn't get the eye of the moderator, Daniel Kurtzweiler. Our speaker today has a less romantic view of arms spending as a unifier. From page 1 of his new book, the candidate Trump's vow to expel warmongers, and then within weeks to revert to the military-industrial machinery and the treadmill without batting an eye. is a warning to all of us as to what we are up against. Quote, "The military-industrial complex is on the verge of radical change," our speaker today writes. "The traditional big defense contractors are now being challenged by tech billionaires. This is not necessarily a step forward to a peaceful world." And when superpowers armed to the teeth have launched wars of aggression against smaller states, it turns out that those ultra-expensive weapon systems have been fairly successfully parried by low-cost drones. As our president now seeks a $1.5 trillion defense budget, we need to be asking, where are we headed for our national defense? What do we really need in terms of national defense? How can we find our way with others in the international system to set limits on this madness? Bill Hartman has answers. He's now senior research fellow at the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft, where he focuses on the arms industry and the U.S. military budget. And he has worked in the past with the New America Foundation and the World Policy Institute. We are fortunate to have been able to draw him on a brilliant summer day in the aftermath of the Knicks' amazing game last night. He got out in New York to talk to us today about where we head on these issues. I give you Bill Hartman.
I think Jeff and Bob have said it also. This concludes my remarks. I'm going to depart from my prepared remarks because my computer broke and I cannot read my own handwriting. But, you know, this ultimate fighting match, I turned 71 last Sunday, so I think I could take Trump. You know? And if I win, he has to step down. They have to divest from other corrupt ventures and invest them in the poor. And they have to end all these wars, which I'm sure he will do peacefully. The only problem is I've only had one fight in my life in 6th grade against my friend Chucky Rizzo. We were fighting over a girl. And I was twice his size, but he knew how to box. So I just laid on top of him for half an hour. And she decided she didn't like either of us. Anyway, so that solves that. But I very much appreciate being here. I think I was here first, maybe in the 90s. I've known Jeff and Bob, Ed Aguilar, who crossed the border from Pennsylvania. There was a woman active, Peggy Spinell, back in the day, who funded me and also left me a bequest. However, I had left the organization that the bequest went to, and it was like a long journey to actually receive the money, which was very useful because it was a bad funding year. So I greatly appreciate that. The time that I spoke, I think I spoke after a journalist named Seymour Hersh, who apparently had a decent career and is still writing. But more important than the people I know, I'm happy there's people that I don't know. For years in the peace movement, I was the youngest person in the room, and I was searching for a solution to that. So I got older. And it works. You know, I've been working on these issues since I was at Columbia in the 70s, which was not like Columbia in the 60s. It was harder. But I was in the South Africa divestment movement, which eventually did win, not only at Columbia, but the Congress passed comprehensive sanctions over Ronald Reagan's veto because of a moderate Republican named Richard Lugar, who, of course, there are no moderate Republicans anymore. They get thrown out of the party. But in any case, a lot of things I worked on then, we won or had partial victories. The anti-apartheid movement, solidarity in Chile, which took many years, but eventually Pinochet was afraid to leave the country because of war crimes charges. I was involved in the early days of the nuclear freeze campaign. I wrote a report called The Economic Consequences of a Nuclear Freeze, all the things we could do with that money. And I worked with a wonderful labor organizer named Jean Carroll, who's still teaching on these issues. But I was on a podcast. There's a guy named Robert Scheer. I don't know if you remember him, but back in the day, he wrote a book called With Enough Shovels. I think he was on a plane maybe with a Reagan civil defense official named T.K. Jones. And he said, "Aren't you worried about nuclear war?" The guy said, "Well, if we dig some holes and we have enough doors to put over them, we just need shovels, really." So anyway, Bob is older than me, and he's gotten a bit discouraged. So I was on his show, and he says, "Bill, you've been doing this for 40 years, and we're losing." And I'm paraphrasing, but we're all going to die. And so I wrote him a note. I said, "Bob, you're a progressive, right? You're trying to mobilize people. That isn't working. In fact, maybe you should spend a few weeks at the beach." So there's that. And then I have a little side career in comedy, which always surprises people because I can be kind of buttoned down. But I did a one-person show called I Get No Respect, My Life as a Failed Foreign Policy Pundit. And I haven't been sued by Rodney Dangerfield's estate yet. But unfortunately, one of the jokes that works well is I say, I work at a foreign policy think tank, and my job's supposed to be promoting world peace, but I'm screwing up so badly I'm going to be fired for incompetence. And I'm sorry that that's funny to people, but part of what's funny is, of course, one person is not going to get it done, as Bob pointed out. But, saying sensible things isn't as funny. I also have been using my book for comedy. People don't believe, I say I'm a foreign policy expert by day and a stand-up comedy. He's no expert. So I hold up the book, The $1 Trillion War Machine, and I say it's a light comedy about the military-industrial complex, and that every other sentence is a punchline. So I read the subtitle, How Runaway Military Spending Drives America into Foreign Wars and Bankrupts Us at Home. And I'm like, laugh riot, right? But I did this once, and the host, I left it on stage. Host said, Bill, your book. And when she handed it back, she says, I can't remember the last time I touched a book. And it's not because she was reading ebooks. So it's hard to sell books, but it's not really the numbers. It's getting it to people who are going to use it. There's a young journalist named Taylor Barnes who does amazing work on the local impacts of the military-industrial complex. She claims, and I'm not going to refute it, that she got interested in this because she was reading my Lockheed Martin book at the beach. So after asking her if she was okay, she has far outstripped me because she's an investigative journalist. So she, for example, exposed Northrop Grumman is building the new ICBM, the Sentinel, in Utah, and they got tax breaks for creating a certain amount of jobs. So Taylor said, well, how many jobs did they promise? How big were the tax breaks? And the state said, oh, that would compromise the interests of Northrop Grumman to tell people how their tax dollars were being spent. So they got a pro bono law firm, and they went at it. And Northrop Grumman thought they were going to crush them because they were spending all this money on armies of lawyers. But Taylor's lawyers are working for free. So they slugged it out. They didn't win, but they elevated the issue. Then her next issue was a couple of workers had died at a hypersonic missile plant, and it was covered up. She met the families were willing to talk about it. It was a huge issue. And finally, she looked at the investments of the Mormon Church, which were heavily into arms manufacturers. There was no awareness of this. So Taylor is like a rock star. She's like the Seymour Hersh of Utah. And I'm proud that she was partly influenced by my book. And frankly, that one book is worth more than a bestseller. Yeah, there's that. And I can read these because I wrote them large. I think, the thing is, if my work isn't useful to organizers, this might as well be a peculiar hobby. I mean, I used to start by talking about the immense power, influence, and money of the military-industrial complex, and people say, God, you're right, Bill. We can't fight these people. So I realized that wasn't working after the first 40 years. And people really need to hear the stories of successes, of people who stand up courageously against overwhelming odds, of the kind of things we heard today. The majority of people oppose the war with Iran, but members don't care about general sentiment. They care about their district. A lot of times they'll compromise because there's jobs related to some factory. The only job they care about more than those jobs is their own job. And so if their constituents are pushing them about it, that's where it matters. I worked with this wonderful group called Action Corps, which used to be the organizing arm of one of the big global Oxfam. And Oxfam said, we're not going to do that anymore. And they said, well, we're going to keep doing this anyway. And they were pushing Eliot Engel, who used to be the head of House Foreign Affairs. He's known for showing up at the State of the Union early so his picture gets taken, which may be a signal accomplishment. But he was tight with the Saudis, and they wanted him to stop arms to Saudi Arabia because of the war in Yemen. So he has a district office in the Bronx. 10 of us went there with a banner saying, "Stop arming genocide against Yemen." And his chief of staff brought us in, and we talked. We didn't have any constituents, so we grabbed him off the street, and we went in together. We met with him, and Engel had a lot of Yemeni bodega owners in his district. They started sending him notes and their kids' drawings from elementary school, and they turned him around. Also, he had a progressive challenger, not Jamal Bowman who beat him, but prior. So he voted against arming Saudi Arabia, and he spoke at the Action Corps annual dinner, said, "I'm with you on this." So a relatively small number of people who are strategic can make a big difference. And Action Corps is transitioning from an older executive director. I mean, older to him, he's in his 40s. To me, that's this kid. But anyway, he has a very young, dynamic Arab American deputy. And the next 2 years, they want to transition, so he will be the director. And I'm helping them raise money to make that happen. Small amounts, but that's the thing. We need organizers, we need younger people engaged. And the way it is now, at least in the DC circles, young people, they'll let you be an intern, underpaid researcher. A lot of young women are carrying these coalitions. They're chairing the coalition against Pentagon spending. They're doing the lobbying. They're doing some of the best research. And they can't get a raise. They don't have a career path. I learned of this because of a young woman I had convinced to work with us who had a rough time of it, wasn't being fully respected. So I told some other young women about it, and they said, "Tell me about it." Because even at the best run places, they were running into similar problems. So one of my side things is I'm part of this young girls network now. And one of them said, "You're the only one who listens to us," which I don't think is true, of my age. But I do listen. I mean, usually we connect on mentoring about writing. We write together. But then we talk about, what kind of world do you want to see? What are your issues at work? How can you make a career of this? And not everybody can. I mean, I've been privileged to do this almost my entire life, but that's not really a job. I mean, getting to yell at the military-industrial complex for a living is kind of absurd. But I've enjoyed it. So we've started this loose network of researchers, young and old, intergenerational. And what I've tried to put forward is, just because you're not paid to do this doesn't mean you can't have a role. So if you're working at something else and you're a brilliant writer, keep writing. And if we have meetings about the future of the movement, the people who aren't getting paid should have a voice. Some of the young researchers who come out of the Palestine movement will come to me with ideas, they want my ideas about research. And inevitably, they know more than I do. There was a young man at University of Indiana who was expelled for standing up on Palestine. And they said, "Will you look at our research about the university's military ties?" So they sent me this 16-page dossier, including the fact that there's a naval warfare center in southern Indiana, which I had never heard of, where they cycled their professors through there. So they started a campaign called Keep Crane Off Campus, the Crane Naval Warfare Center. That center does counterinsurgency training, designs artillery shells. Likewise, there's a young professor who has concerns about whether he's going to get deported because of his immigration status, but he's doing amazing research. He found out about in northern Jersey, a warehouse where they send spare parts to Israel. and they did an action to try to block that. But he can't write under his own name, so I've been feeding his material to younger researchers. One of our interns did a piece about Israel funding drone research at University of Central Florida. And there's somebody they got a PhD for who hired, paid by Israel, to figure out when you have swarms of drones, how to keep them from crashing into each other, which involves something like a magnetometer. If any physicists will explain to me what that is. But anyway, so there's all this amazing work. And so what I have done is it's just a listserv, but people put up their research needs, and I try to pair the younger researchers with somebody established to do stuff together for, short-term pay. And it's kind of working. I mean, there's people from the Palestine movement talking to people like Michael Clare and Mike Locker and people who used to run the NARMIC, National Institute of Research on Military Industrial Complex. They had a webinar with a group called Little Sis about how to uncover the military ties of a university. And it didn't have to go that way. It could have easily been people like me saying, well, you should do it my way, young people. But we're actually learning more from them than they are from us. So I find that hopeful in its own way. And then I've been traveling a bit for my book. I don't normally travel. I sit at my dining room table and opine. But I was in New Mexico and Montana. And in New Mexico, I spoke to the World Affairs Council, which are, pretty established. I sat between the former ambassador to Japan and a guy who had been at the Pentagon for 25 years, who wanted to ask me about the Sentinel. I know the ICBM, I know who was for it or against it. And so rather than be intimidated, I did some shtick, which they thought was funny. And they were kind of with me because a lot of them are from the diplomatic corps, which is being destroyed. So they've been radicalized a bit. And I spoke to the winners of the statewide foreign policy quiz, and they decided, when they come to the big meeting, they kind of stay to themselves. I spent a half hour, just the seven of us, and there was this young woman who's an expert on the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative. So she schooled me on that. And then her friends were a little shy, so she explained to me what each of the other people were doing. So that was encouraging. Then in Montana, I was speaking to the conference before the annual Quiz Bowl, 500 high school students about nuclear nonproliferation in a state that has one of the biggest ICBM bases in the world that's the prime employer. So I was trying to figure out what to say. And the war started before the Sunday that I spoke. So I said, you see this war in the Middle East, that's your president's idea of nonproliferation. Attacking a country that doesn't have nuclear weapons, 2 nuclear-armed states rampaging across the Middle East, a country where we had an agreement, which he called Obama's agreement, but was an agreement among the US, the EU, European powers, China, and Russia, which hadn't happened in many, many years, was stronger on verification than many other agreements. The strongest argument of the other side was, what happens 15 years from now when it gets, you loosen up? Well, let's see. 15 years is an eternity in politics. So, when Trump trashed the agreement, he said, I'll create something better. So I said to the students, does that seem better to you? Raise your hand if you think it's better. And they did not think it was better. However, it wasn't a full test because, they were kind of eggheads and they cared about the world, which is not a thing with MAGA, The thing with MAGA is telling them how great we are and bullying them. So, but anyway, I found this interesting. I was in a country bar, and I had lost, my bags had gone to New York, so I had shopped in the Denver airport, and I was wearing like a flannel shirt, and I was getting water, and this young kid says, oh, hydrating, huh, old man? And I said, yeah. And then he said, what are you doing here? I thought, oh, great, here we go. I said, well, I'm here to speak to 500 high school students about nuclear nonproliferation. He said, yeah, why do we have so many of those things? So we had a long talk, and I thought, oh, I'm reaching the grassroots. But he did brain research at Vanderbilt, but he happened to do it remote. So I hadn't fully touched the grassroots. Although I did meet a rancher, fourth generation, and I said, well, at least you create food that feeds people. I put forth ideas that the government ignores. He said, oh, I like you, young man. But he was like 30 years younger than me, but nonetheless. It wasn't as inhospitable an environment as I imagined it might be. I really feel like there's all kinds of seeds of opposition The industrial workers of the world, the Wobblies, used to say, you have to build the seeds of the new society in the shell of the old. And I think that's happening. I mean, there's so many things happening. Many of them people don't even know about what's happening elsewhere. I mean, the Poor People's Campaign has found many local campaigns that are not yet connected to each other or to national work. So I find that very hopeful. But then, now here's what would have been the beginning of my speech. We're up against some powerful interests. You got the old military-industrial complex, which I almost pine for compared to these unhinged tech bros in Silicon Valley. They're not all bros, but they act like bros. And you know, their ideology is almost as dangerous as their technology. You know, Peter Thiel wants to upload himself to a computer and live forever. I say, fine, just don't bring me with you. And then we'll get some hackers to make it so he can't talk to us. Problem solved. And then, you know, Elon Musk wants mass colonization of space. Again, I'm not going. But of course, if you think you can do that, then you don't care about Earth. And the little secret here, they're not going to bring everybody with them. They're going to bring what they view as the elite. It'll be like, you know, royalty that's been interbreeding for 3 generations. But anyway, and then there's a guy, Palmer Luckey, who, as a teenager, created the Oculus, which is a virtual reality headset that you can use in your own home. And then Peter Thiel said, why don't you get into weapons? Which he did. And he's 32 now. He has a soul patch. He wears Birkenstocks and Hawaiian shirts. And he opines on foreign policy. He's a gamer. He doesn't know anything about foreign policy. He was on 60 Minutes. He said, well, when we win the war with China because of my technology. And I'm like, you know they have nuclear weapons, right? Do you really think we're going to have a war with China that's not going to go nuclear? You know, likewise, they've started doing what the old companies do. They're hiring people from the government, either to work at their firms directly, like Mike Gallagher, who ran the Congressional Committee on Communist China, went to work for Palantir at age 40. Normally, they wait to cash in later. And then a lot of military people are going to venture capital firms. And if you invest in a military company that makes it, you can earn millions of dollars. In the old days, you went to Lockheed Martin, 4 meetings a year, made $300,000, which is fine, but millions, you know. But I think the most obscene is, it appears that people in the Trump administration have been betting on the poly markets about things like when we're going to bomb somewhere. Guess what? They know. So it's not like you have a career and you cash in. It's instantaneous. And then you have Jared Kushner, funded by the Saudis, Don Jr., funded by the UAE, Don Jr. on the board of a drone company, President Trump owning a piece of the UFC group, so he's actually going to profit from his little birthday celebration. So this is like the Gilded Age on steroids. I mean, there's no time frame, there's no difference. And then, of course, the other thing which we've all felt is, you know, almost a decade ago, Steve Bannon said, you know, the way we win is muzzle velocity. If you send 6 bullets at once, 4 of them are going to get through. That's the policy of this administration. They do so many terrible things, they say so many terrible things, that we can't get our footing. And I know a lot of people, including friends of mine, say, well, I don't know what to do, and they're sitting it out. I don't know what to do either, but I do know, unless we're in motion and organizing, we're never going to figure it out. And so there's probably millions or tens of millions of people traumatized sitting on the sidelines. They need to join us. They can do it in a small way, like giving to your organization. They can come to a demonstration, whatever level they're willing to do, whatever risk they're willing to take. And we have to be welcoming. You know, I've been to, back in the 80s, in ancient history, I volunteered with the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador. And I was at a think tank, and I knew about the military aid program. All I wanted to do is go speak on behalf of the group. They said, well, check with Bob. Come to the mailing on Sunday. Maybe you can catch his ear. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Likewise, my daughter, who organized at university, they would have onboarding processes. You would have coffee with somebody, you'd see about their background. They did fun stuff, like one of the meetings, which I joined foolishly, they did found poetry. You take a page of a magazine and you pick out random words and make poems and then read them to each other. So they've got this idea of joy in the struggle, of building community, which of course exists and has existed in our movements, but sometimes we fall short on that. We're so concerned about the struggle of the moment, or old white guys like me start pontificating instead of listening. When people ask me, like, what should be the strategy for the movement, I'm like, I'm a 71-year-old white guy sitting at my table in Manhattan. I shouldn't be making the strategy for the movement. It should be the people on the front lines, the downwinders, the people, the vets who've come back from those wars and are now anti-war, the people suffering from the big ugly bill, the Poor People's Campaign. And if I can be helpful in that, that's fine. But the idea that I should come up with the ideas is archaic. There's a woman named Barbara Ransby, who's part of the Black feminist movement, who wrote the definitive biography of Ella Baker, who is much less known than MLK, but possibly more important, one of the best organizers, didn't seek praise or visibility. Barbara gave a speech at Barnard College before that whole Columbia region became an anti-free speech zone. And she said, the era of the charismatic black leader is over, and certainly of the charismatic white leader, if you could find a charismatic white guy. She pointed to the Movement for Black Lives, which she also wrote about, which was a distributed leadership. It wasn't one leader. It was primarily women of color and queer women of color. So when people talk about feminist foreign policy, like, how's that going to work? Well, one of the most important movements of our lifetimes was led by black feminists. So we need new ways of organizing. We need to involve younger people. I kind of cheating, because I'll do it partly through comedy. I did a benefit for Peace Action in New York State. And often when I go to the meetings, there's sort of this Greek chorus, "Where are the young people?" And I said, well, they're having their own meetings. Maybe you should go to one. But I brought some of my younger friends who do climate and human rights, and they looked at our crowd, they're like, get out of here. You've been doing this for your whole life? That is admirable. And then the older folks were like, hey, there's young people who care. And it wasn't about an agenda, it was about meeting each other. And probably the most amazing thing, and I'll close with this, we lost Cora and Peter Weiss last year. And Cora could be harsh, I went to see her a few months before Peter died, and my wife said, you gotta bring flowers, you gotta bring flowers. And I was in Midtown, and there was all these flower design places with like $200 bouquets. Finally, I found a grocery store with some yellow roses for $20. So I get in the door, and Cora says, we're not dead yet, And I don't know if she would want me to tell that, but it's too late. But anyway, she eventually said she did appreciate them. Then we sat down for snacks before they kicked me out, because they watched Democracy Now!, the two of them, they got to focus. And Peter said, he's not with us, because like 10 years ago, I wrote something about verifying the New START treaty. And he took me out to the woodshed and said, abolition is the only way. And he was still harboring that. But Cora said, he's okay, Peter. He's all right. But anyway, when I would tell my young friends about Cora's life, at University of Wisconsin, she was in the Joe Must Go movement to get rid of Joe McCarthy. She was in the Ban the Bomb movement. She helped organize the Vietnam moratorium. Peter was on the board of American Women in Africa. They knew members of the African National Congress, actually smuggled them out of South Africa in the trunk of their car. She brought Kenyan students here to study at the post-colonial period, one of whom was Barack Obama's father. She did work on women, peace, and security, a resolution at the UN that's just quite well regarded. She worked on peace education, and on and on and on. And so I would tell my younger colleagues who were like, that is amazing. And I wanted to see if we could do a book about Cora, but her daughter Judy said, yeah, Cora'd have to edit it. I don't think we can do that. But she is friendly with John Alpert, who runs Downtown Community TV. So I think I'm going to convince him to do a short film, half hour. There's film of Cora, and also many people would weigh in about their work together. David Courtwright, who used to run, Nuclear Freeze Campaign, which is now Peace Action, and helped raise money for the million-person disarmament march. Very unassuming guy. We were at a thing recently, and a Japanese newspaper asked us if we thought we should get rid of nuclear weapons. We said yes. But I think they thought they were talking to just people on the street. And I said, well, you know, David helped organize the Million-Person March on Disarmament, and he's got a website that has quite a good section on Quora. He's tweaking it, but it's kind of a history of the peace movement. And David and I have reconnected. We write together. Usually I write with younger colleagues. We're like, yeah, I shouldn't abandon the old guard, you know. So we wrote a piece, for example, for Sojourners about this historic role of religious movements in peace. And I am not part of an organized religion. I'm not even a Unitarian. But you know, I do believe we're here for a purpose, and it's to make the world a better place. So, you know, I'm on board with any religion that's trying to unite people, bring peace, bring justice, and I'm very much opposed to anybody who misuses religion for division and hatred. And I think that's really the only issue. People will have different ideas. I have a favorite folk singer, Iris DeMent, and she has a song called Let the Mystery Be. Different people have different ideas. And she has one of the lines is something about people think we're going to come back as a bunch of carrots and little green peas, you know, like reincarnation. You know, I think especially now with these inhumane tech folks who really don't care about the rest of us, who really have almost no humanity left, it's really about restoring our humanity, standing up for humanity. And that means peace, that means justice, that means fighting poverty. It means putting all those things back on the agenda and appreciating each other as we do it. So I'm quite hopeful. I'm 71. I'm just getting the hang of this thing. And a lot of it's because of my younger colleagues. I have a colleague, Janet, who's in her mid-20s. She started a group at University of Texas called Women for Weapons Trade Transparency, which is a mouthful. But they wanted them to divest from arms companies, and they did an alternative portfolio, quite professional, about how they could make more money getting out of the arms industry. But the engineering students were not having it because they wanted the connections. But anyway, she had a grant from the Carnegie Corporation, which expired, so she's now working with us as the world's most overqualified intern. And in 3 months, we co-authored a piece that was in the Nation's special issue on AI. She wrote several articles about Lebanon, where her family's from, and is still there, some of which were used for talking points when Rashida Tlaib did a war powers resolution on Lebanon. And she's making $16 an hour, and she's turning down TV interviews because they conflict with her barista shift. So I'm old, I can speak out. I said to our leadership, I said, we have a guy that's making like $150 a year, not $1.50. And he wrote 2 articles last year. Janet's more productive than him and many of our senior fellows, and she's making $16 an hour. That's got to change. And what they said was, don't talk about salaries. So on the side, we've started a project to try to make more space for younger people in the field, whether it's full-time jobs or short-term research, or just understanding that we're not all going to get paid to do this. I try to remind people there's never been a revolution started by DC think tanks. And if there was, you probably wouldn't want to be part of it. So I have a friend who left PSR because she felt she wasn't being fully respected, a young African-American woman who had written some brilliant articles about abolition, but also about the steps to get there. And I said, you got to keep writing. Have to. She went home to Wisconsin. She was going to be a death doula, which is like helping people deal with all the emotions, the paperwork, et cetera. But she didn't have a car, and she couldn't develop a clientele. She's coming back to Washington full-time, working with ACLU on fighting back on deportations and surveillance. And so she's in the fold, but a lot of people won't be. And so what we're doing is we're staying in communication. People who do this as a passion, people who do this as a living, working together. And also, I think people who have the commitment to do that should be part of the movement when we make strategy, when we have conferences. A lot of them are frankly more motivated and skilled than people like me who've been doing it so long. We've been worn down by the kind of incremental process in Washington. So that's really what I want to do now. And I don't want to get paid for it because I don't want to chew up money that should go to young folks. So I get somebody else to pay me and then trick them into thinking I'm doing something else while I do this, which I think I might be able to pull off. So anyway, what I really want to do is thank you all, because I think without organizing at the local level, we're not going to move this. And I can make the most exquisite arguments possible, but speaking truth to power is step one. Doing alternative power is what we really need. Because if the best ideas won out, we would live in a very wonderful world. But unfortunately, it takes work. Work like Jeff and Bob and all the folks in this room and Ed Aguilar have done their whole lives. And that's my other message to young folks is it's going to take a while. So hang in there, and let's make sure we have some fun along the way, and let's be welcoming, and let's not be the guy who says, oh yeah, I'll make strategy for the movement from my kitchen table in New York. So that's what I have to say. And I did. My apologies for departing from my prepared remarks, but I blame it on my computer.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Stay up here, because we're going to have Q&A next.
Oh, right, Q&A.
Yeah, Q&A, and we've got about a little over 15 minutes to finish on time. But before I ask for your questions, I'm going to take a show of hands in a moment. I also want to let it be known that there are 4 or 5 more books left back there, Evan? Something like that. And so there's a few. These are going like hotcakes, so be sure you get yours before you leave. And they're only $25. So I encourage you to get that. I haven't read the whole book yet, but I'm through about the first 1/3 of it, and it's just absolutely fantastic. It's mind-blowing.
You don't have to read it. Just put it behind you when you're on Zoom.
Put it behind you when you're on Zoom. Good idea. So now I am going to take a stack of hands, and we'll get through as many questions as we can. So if you have a question, brief question, please raise your hand, and I'll number you off. 1, 2, 3. Anybody want to be question number 4 over here? 5, 6. Great. Let's do those 6, and we'll see where we stand. So who was questioner number 1? Was that you, Kip? Oh, and could somebody take the mic around?
Okay. So, Bill, could you talk about the NDAA and the mythological notion that we can just run down to Congress and get amendments and get changes and everything will be hunky-dory? What kind of strategy should we be using? Because obviously we have not been using the right strategy.
Well, the National Defense Authorization Act sets policy for foreign policy. Sometimes they sneak in other things too. And they call it the must-pass bill. And unfortunately, in the past, that's meant in order to pass it, they throw all the progressive amendments under the bus. But it's pretty much been decided now in committee, and it's hard to win on the floor if the committee has endorsed something. So we can fight on the floor, we can fight in the conference committee, we can try to go after the money, but you really want to win up front. And I think as we discussed, we should start thinking now about amendments that we want. A lot of times the DC groups try to do every amendment, defend against every amendment, fight every amendment, and as a result, we can't do it. There's just too much going on. But if we had a couple things we agreed on that we wanted, and we started pushing the members now, and of course that would also mean getting it through the Rules Committee, which if you had more members could happen, maybe we could make a dent on a couple issues. At this point, our biggest hope is in appropriations, because even some Republicans are like, 1.5 trillion, we can't do that in a year. Let's do it over 5 years. But they put some of it in this separate pot called reconciliation because it's kind of filibuster proof. But when they passed the big ugly bill, they only won by 1 vote in each house. So it's possible that bill, which is $300 billion, might go down. And then there's a bill to cut $150 billion from the main part. So it's still not enough. They would still get an increase. But the members are starting to get mobilized. And in fact, a number of members have said, those Biden administration officials, that supported genocide in Israel should never be in government again. And you would never hear a Democrat say that a few years ago. So I think there is movement. But on the NDAA, you're right. We got to think ahead. And we have to, among ourselves, come up with some priorities, which have to be a step that's possible. I mean, basically, there's a couple ideas about reforms. Saul Alinsky said, any reform is good because people feel like they've won a victory. Miles Horton, who did the Highlander School, trained on the civil rights stuff, said it depends on the reform. If it sets you up for the next fight, that's fine. But you don't want to get bogged down in some incremental thing and waste your time. So we have to be strategic about what the steps are, but we're not going to get our biggest demand tomorrow. So I think your point's well taken.
All right, number 2, right there.
Thanks very much. Acknowledging that you are a 71-year-old white guy, I have a strategic question for you. So a couple of weeks ago, some activists, I think shut down Port Elizabeth because of the arms shipments that are going out from there. And so what they ended up doing was shutting down Port Elizabeth for about 3 hours. They created a 3-mile or so backup. A lot of them got arrested, and the action was covered by the non-mainstream media, but not at all by the mainstream media. So my question is that a success or is it a failure? And what does that mean for similar actions going forward?
Yeah, I know the folks who did the research to underline that. I think it's a success in the sense that, there's a film, this is related, I promise, about the 82-year-old nun who broke into Oak Ridge. It's called The Priest, the Nuns, and the Bomb by Helen Young. And I was at a meeting about that with the people who had broken into a Trident sub base in Kings Bay, including Phil Berrigan's wife, people from the Catholic Worker. And, back in the day when the Berrigan brothers burned the draft files, that was national and global news. When they did this thing at Kings Bay about the submarines, not so much. And they asked me what I thought. I said, well, I don't have the courage to do what you did, but it makes me want to work harder. And I wrote about that for Waging Nonviolence, which goes mostly to organizers. So I think it's still a success. And also, it gets a little more to the heart of the problem. Because in Congress, they're trying to block new arms sales. They already have a ton of American arms, and they're living off American spare parts. And that's what was being shipped out of Port Elizabeth. So I don't know if we can get the kind of mainstream coverage that you used to be able to get. But there's also many, many forms of ways to get information. Unfortunately, Democracy Now! Did it in their news wrap-up rather than a separate story. But I think if people are courageous enough to do that, we have to find ways to get it out there, be it podcasts, be it alternative media. And the problem with that is people have to curate their media and go to sources that aren't conspiracy theories and rumors. And so it's harder, but in a way, outside the mainstream, you can go a little deeper. Like if you're on a podcast for an hour, you can get into detail. When I was on CNN for 3 minutes, they put me on with a general who said I was a terrorist sympathizer. And if I had answered him, I wouldn't have been able to make my point. So I said, that's frivolous, and I said my point. And then afterwards, Chris Cuomo, who's since been pushed out, said, Trump says he's rebuilt the military. I said, well, he's been in office for 3 months, and he hasn't submitted a budget yet, so I don't think so. But I was also shocked that the head of a major news show didn't have a researcher that could tell him that. But I know what you mean. It's slow going, and it doesn't get the recognition it deserves. But I think if people have the courage to do it, it inspires me to do more than I'm doing now.
Number 3. Oh, right here in front.
Bill, with Trump's allowing the New START treaty limits to expire, all that we pretty much have left in terms of regulation of nuclear weaponry is the non-proliferation treaty regime, and you followed the most recent review conference. Is this a pretty weak reed on which to rely, or is this a cornerstone that we can, thinking ahead past 2028, use to rebuild real reductions in nuclear weapons? And what in the way of advocacy is this, the NPT, as something to try to take to people, or should we be looking elsewhere for grassroots excitement and enthusiasm?
Well, I don't think we should let it go down. I think that would be a bad thing. Of course, you know, it was created when Nixon and Kissinger were in office. Well, but it was ratified under Nixon. They didn't oppose it. So there used to be Republicans who realized arms control was a way from not getting yourself killed. But the meeting, the last meeting was a mess. They tried to, you know, not let Iran be on one of the committees. Not many people criticized the war on Iran, even though it's two nuclear powers rampaging across the Middle East. Even in the best of times, often the big countries say, oh yeah, we got rid of 3 nukes, we're on the way. Because under Article 6, it's supposed to be the big powers get rid of their nukes, other countries agree not to acquire them. So they knocked out Gaddafi, they killed the head of Iran, and then they wonder why countries want to get nuclear weapons. Of the axis of evil, the only last one standing is Kim Jong-un, who has nuclear weapons. So we actually have a pro-proliferation policy. But in the context of the NPT, I mean, I think the bottleneck is the governments. And so can we organize in all of those places? And back in the heyday, there was a guy named Joseph Rotblat, who should have a movie about him instead of Oppenheimer. Because he actually, once he realized Hitler wasn't going to get the bomb, he resigned from the Manhattan Project. He helped start the Pugwash movement, which was a global movement of scientists, which came up with ideas of how to verify arms control agreements, created some kind of community among scientists in the Soviet Union and the US. So we need a global movement. And one would say, well, how are you going to change in Russia or China? It's not certainly easy, but we will need that, except for the point that at some point, perhaps these countries will realize it's a matter of their own survival. You know, they used to have this, you know, scorpions in a bottle up to their knees in, you know, gasoline wielding masters at each other. Arms control was sort of like a way to have communications and hopefully keep these things from being used, as they did after the Cuban Missile Crisis with the hotline and so forth. We don't really even have that in a very good way now. I mean, we're not talking to Russia. Trump is, you know, hot and cold about China. So I think we need communications. We need to build a global norm against nuclear weapons. I support the ban treaty, but that's not going to happen in the short term. So we need a bridge to that. And if the discussions around the NPT can at least, one thing that was good was that a lot of the governments and the NGOs that came had quite robust conversations about what we need to do. I met people from all over the world doing good work. So I think we shouldn't junk it's sort of like what they said about the New York Times, which I don't think is even true anymore, the best of a bad lot. You know, we don't want to get rid of it, we want to improve it, but the way to improve it is going to go through changing the policies of these governments, because the principle makes sense. I mean, the big powers should get rid of their nuclear weapons. They've been hypocrites about that. But I wouldn't want it to go down the way all the other agreements have gone down, because then we're in the Wild West. Or even in the Wild West, sometimes the sheriff would make you check your gun when you came into town. So maybe that's a slur on the Wild West.
Okay, question 4. Question 4 over here. Just hold on till you get the mic.
So, you know, it's 2026. We've had nuclear weapons since 1945. We've got more, 9 nations now. Japan is starting up its arms stuff. They all want nuclear weapons. You know, we have to admit it. How do we fight that? Well, we're not going to fight it, I don't think, in little peace organizations. We're all going to fight it if we unite, which has been said, teamwork, if we unite with other peace groups, if we get people like the Pope to speak more openly, if we get these religions in our corner on the moral basis. I mean, why are we here? It's a moral question. So if we get that unity together, maybe we'll have a chance. And I think what we need last is the unity of media. Media has to be in our corner, or we're not going to Get the message to the masses.
Well, my boss thinks the reason Reagan reversed on nuclear weapons is because of the day after being on TV. And I said, well, you know, if there hadn't been the non-aligned movement, the European nuclear disarmament movement, the nuclear freeze, a million people in Central Park, they would not have been able to make that movie. She said, nah, it was the movie. So I think the media changes when the political landscape changes. And if it's being debated in government, it's legit for them to talk about. You know, a lot of times, like if I wrote an article that says the peace movement wants peace, we're destroying the world, they would be, where's your news hook, Bill? You know, and the only reason I get covered is because sometimes I have some numbers in there. A reporter from Politico said, yeah, I don't cover advocates really, but since you have some information, I make an exception for you. But you're right, it's got to be global. Most of the things that matter globally have been international in scope. The Landmines Treaty, Cluster Treaty, nuclear ban, and they've been led from outside the United States. So when I was a student, I thought, you know, oh, well, I'm spreading democracy to the world, I'm helping out these folks. We're the ones who need the help. And they talk about exporting democracy. First, let's import a democracy. Let's have a democracy before we start telling other people what they should be doing.
Okay, I think we only have time for one more question, David, and who was 5? I'm sorry, David, but we've got to be respectful of our ending time.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good.
The dominant discussion and concern is the price of the war and how much it's costing the United States. One important factor is missing the human cost, the suffering of the Iranian people, the destruction, who have suffered enough in the hand of their own government. The truth is, at least prior to this war, the United States never had one bombing against Iran. Now this thing has changed everything. My question to you is, has this war was any justification? And number 2, this war has increased the respect and the role of the United States, not only in Iran, but the rest of the world. Thank you.
Well, no and no, but you know, I think the amazing thing about this war is even the propaganda is crappy. I mean, George W. Bush and Dick Cheney bullied the intelligence community to come up with some fake paper about Iraq being a threat. And they had these little catchwords like, you know, we don't want the smoking gun that becomes a mushroom cloud. And it was all nonsense. You know, Saddam Hussein, the one thing, he didn't really want to own up entirely to not having a nuclear program because he thought they'd take him out, and they did. It wasn't because he had a big nuclear weapons program. In the case of Iran, you know, last year when they bombed, Trump said, we've completely obliterated their nuclear program. And then when he wanted to start the war, after Netanyahu bombed, his partner in crime, he said, well, they might be able to attack us. The implication was with a nuclear weapon. So a reporter cornered him on the tarmac and said, well, you said they were obliterated, so what are you talking about? He said, well, there might be one buried under the rubble. Okay, maybe there is. Do they have a missile that they can attach it to that goes 6,000 miles? I don't think so. And even the discussion about them getting enriched material, a bomb by itself, without miniaturizing it, putting on a missile, et cetera, does not threaten the United States. So, and then what have they done? Well, you know, they asked Pete Hegseth, everybody's favorite Fox News host, you know, why can't you tell us what it costs? He says, well, it costs a lot of money to kill bad guys. What bad guys? The girls at that elementary school, the nurses bringing babies out of hospitals and incubators. It's shameful. And of course, his idea of the US military is like the Michigan militia with better guns. He's getting rid of diversity, he's getting rid of black people, he's getting rid of women. And his idea of the warfighter is somebody who's loyal to Donald Trump, who likes to kill people. They're supposed to be reluctant warriors that only act in our defense, who are loyal to the Constitution. So it's a complete outrage. And I think it's like the emperor not only has no clothes, his skin is falling off. So the problem is, you know, even when you have the arguments on your side, ideology runs deep. People say, well, you don't want China running the world, or American exceptionalism. Some people still think our military is doing charity work, helping people. Or if we don't run the world, all those little kids in the other countries are going to misbehave. Well, the damage our government has done pretty much outmatches all those other countries. Not that there aren't problems. The U.S. isn't the only source of problems in the world. That's why we should be trying to build cooperation with China on things like climate in regions. But I would like the United States to be a good global citizen. I don't care if we have more weapons. I don't care if we're the big dog. That has caused us all kinds of problems. And there's people in the Trump support camp. It's cut down the middle. There's working class white guys who lost their jobs. The white working class has a declining living standard. And Trump says, well, he said he was the president of peace. He criticized the Iraq War. They thought, well, maybe let's take a shot on this guy. And he called himself the president of peace. Even in this term, they have this boring document called the National Strategy Document. The opening must have been written by Trump, because he's like, I'm the president of peace. I've solved 8 conflicts, including, he said, he had solved the problem between Israel and Iran. So he's either delusional or he thinks we're idiots. But the problem is, I think there's still this notion of, I want to be part of the toughest country in the world. If you don't use military force, you're not acting. And that goes against what happened in Iraq, what happened in Afghanistan. And now the tech folks are saying, oh, technology will save us. Well, in Vietnam, they have this thing called the electronic battlefield. It's supposed to locate every Viet Cong in the jungle. So they did 2 things. They put pots full of urine in the jungle, which they destroyed, and they ran empty convoys. And they junked that thing within 2 years. Reagan's perfect missile shield didn't work. Precision-guided munitions, they lost wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but people who were using bombs attached to their phones, because they were defending against what they saw as an occupier. They knew the culture, they knew the country. A lot of our troops, once they got there, were kind of unclear why they were there. Many of them said they really just got back to just protecting their own unit to get home in one piece. They said the government lied to them, and they also said they had done things that haunted them. Now, a lot of them won't speak because they don't, there's sort of a relatively small cohort that goes in the military, and sometimes people who haven't been are very insensitive. They'll say things like, yeah, what's it like to kill somebody? So they talk to their own circles. Some of them have spoken out. There's groups like Common Defense, About Face, Veterans for Peace, and they're, to me, some of the most important organizers, because they've seen war, they know it doesn't work. The generals are all going to work for the big companies. The people who have been in the wars are arguing against more war. So, but yeah, I think what was done to Iran, going back to the installation of the Shah, is decades of essentially organized criminal activity. And, whatever the regime may have been doing to its own people, attacking it is more likely to strengthen that regime than weaken it. And many of the human rights organizers in Iran said, please, please don't side with us. You're just going to give the regime another reason to crack down on us. So all this notion about caring about the Iranian people while you're bombing elementary schools should be laughed out of court. But we have a lot of work to do because some of these concepts are deeply embedded. And so we just have to, I think on the one hand, we have to yell it from the rooftops. On the other hand, we have to engage individually, draw people out, figure out why they think what they think. And it's hard to do both, but I think it is necessary.
Thanks a lot, Bill. Thank you very much. And just a few closing remarks. I want to express strong gratitude to our people that have been helping make this event happen. First and foremost, Jen New, there in the back, our assistant director. Let's see, David Crow, who is doing a video, but also did a lot of pictures. And David's recording of this will be on our website in the not too distant future. So be watching for that. And he's also taken some pictures. We're having another picture taker, so there's going to be some nice photos you can watch. And Ray Veracruz has been running Zoom for us. Did you get, what? So we are very grateful for you coming. And I hope you found this afternoon to be empowering. And stay in touch, because it's us working together. And let's end with the famous mantra that I invented, by the way, in case anybody wonders. Peace is a team effort. Peace is a team effort. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day.